On my 21st birthday, my grandma gifted me a 50 million hotel. After dinner, my mom showed up with her new husband, insisting we run it together as a family. I replied, "Not a chance. I own it now." My mom snapped, "Then pack your bags and get out of this house." Right then, Grandma laughed and revealed another surprise. The locks were changed, my bags were on the curb, and my own mother wouldn't even look me in the eye. That's what it felt like in the pit of my stomach, a cold, sickening lurch as her razor-sharp smile carved itself into my memory. "No, Emma. This house belongs to me." My world, which had just hours before expanded to an unimaginable scale, now felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet. Just a few hours prior, the champagne flutes had caught the amber glow of the chandelier, each crystal radiating tiny sparks of light as my grandmother, Dorothy Whitfield, rose from her seat. At 83, she moved with a grace that spoke of decades spent not just walking but commanding, from boardrooms to grand ballrooms. Her silver hair, swept into an elegant chignon, framed a face etched with a lifetime of shrewd decisions and unwavering resolve. The pearls at her neck, a silent tribute to my late grandfather, Robert, gleamed softly. I sat to her right, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, the entire room of 20-odd guests hushed in anticipation. From across the polished mahogany table, my father Thomas met my gaze with a small, knowing smile, a conspiratorial glint in his eyes. He'd been maddeningly cryptic all week, deflecting every excited question about my 21st birthday plans with vague pronouncements about patience being a virtue. 60 years ago, my grandmother began, her voice a low murmur that somehow filled every corner of the opulent dining room, carrying the slight rasp of age but losing none of its commanding presence. My husband, Robert, and I purchased a crumbling Victorian building on the waterfront with nothing but a dream and a loan that kept us awake at night. I knew the story by heart, of course. My grandfather had passed when I was 7, but the saga of how he and my grandmother transformed that dilapidated warehouse into the Whitfield Grand, one of the most prestigious boutique hotels on the eastern seaboard, was woven into the very fabric of my childhood. Every summer, I'd spent weeks navigating those hallowed halls, learning the names of the housekeeping staff, observing management meetings, soaking up the intricacies of hospitality that Grandma insisted were essential life skills. "Emma," she said, turning her attention directly to me, her blue eyes piercing and clear, "you have spent the past 3 years working at the Whitfield Grand during every school break. You started in housekeeping, moved to front desk operations, learned food and beverage management, and last summer, you shadowed our general manager for 8 weeks. You did not ask for special treatment because of your name. You earned every promotion through merit." A hot flush spread across my cheeks as the assembled guests murmured their approval. These were my grandmother's friends and business associates, my father, my stepmother Linda, and my 2 half-siblings, the 14-year-old twins Oliver and Grace. Conspicuously absent, as always, was my mother, Valerie, though honestly, I'd stopped expecting her presence at family gatherings years ago. "The hotel is valued at $50 million, according to the most recent appraisal," my grandmother continued, and the room went absolutely still, the air thick with unspoken avarice. "As of today, I am transferring full ownership to my granddaughter, Emma Whitfield. Happy 21st birthday, my darling." The silence stretched for 3 agonizing heartbeats before shattering into a symphony of applause and gasps of surprise. My father was already on his feet, crossing to embrace me, his eyes suspiciously bright. I, however, sat frozen, unable to process the sheer magnitude of what I had just heard. "Grandma," I finally managed, my voice a cracked whisper, "I can't possibly accept this. The hotel should go to Dad, or at least stay in a family trust." "Your father and I have discussed this extensively," she interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "Thomas has his architectural firm, his investments, and absolutely no desire to run a hotel. He agreed completely with my decision. You, Emma, are the only one in this family who has shown genuine passion for the hospitality industry. The hotel needs someone who will love it, not someone who sees it as an obligation." My father squeezed my shoulder. "She's right, sweetheart. I watched you grow up in those hallways. You know the hotel better than any consultant or outside manager ever could. Grandma and I have been planning this for 2 years." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, clinking champagne glasses, and hushed conversations about transition timelines, but that was only the beginning of the nightmare. My grandmother had already retained a hospitality law firm, and the general manager, Patricia Chen, who had been with the hotel for 22 years, was briefed weeks ago. By 10 o'clock, most guests had departed. My grandmother had retreated to her study, and I was still slightly dazed on the settee when the front doorbell chimed. My stepmother Linda went to answer it, and I heard her sharp intake of breath before a familiar voice, shrill and demanding, cut through the quiet house. Where is she? Where's my daughter? The blood drained from my face, a cold rush. I hadn't heard that voice in person for almost 2 years. Not since my mother had shown up at my college graduation party uninvited and caused a scene that ended with campus security escorting her off the premises. Valerie Whitfield Thornton swept into the parlor like a storm front rolling in from the ocean. She was 47, but maintained the appearance of someone 10 years younger through what I suspected was a combination of excellent genetics and expensive dermatologists. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves. Her designer dress probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Behind her trailed a man I vaguely recognized from photographs, Richard Thornton, her current husband, the fourth one since she'd divorced my father when I was 3. He was perhaps 50, with a tan that suggested frequent golf outings and the soft, uncalloused hands of someone who had never done manual labor in his life. "Mom," I said flatly, rising from the settee, "what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" She laughed, a brittle sound that scraped against my nerves. "My only child just inherited a $50 million property, and you're asking why I'm here. Richard and I came as soon as we heard the news." I glanced at my father, who had gone rigid by the fireplace. "How did you even find out?" "The transfer hasn't been publicly announced yet. I have friends," she said dismissively, waving a manicured hand. "Friends who keep me informed about what my former mother-in-law is doing with family assets that should rightfully involve me in any decision-making process." "You divorced Dad 18 years ago," my father said quietly, his voice tight. "You have no claim to anything in this family, Valerie. You made that choice." She ignored him, focusing entirely on me. "Emma, sweetheart, we need to discuss this rationally. You're 21 years old. You have no business experience, no management credentials, no understanding of what it takes to run a major hospitality venture. Richard and I have been talking, and we think the best solution is for us to manage the hotel together as a family. Richard has extensive experience in real estate development." Here's the thing about this kind of interaction. It wasn't just about her claiming a share. This was classic manipulative gaslighting, a psychological tactic where one person tries to make another doubt their own perceptions, abilities, and even their sanity. By belittling my qualifications and positioning herself and Richard as the only competent adults, Valerie was attempting to undermine my confidence and coerce me into relinquishing control. This isn't just about inheritance. It's about power and control over another individual's choices. "Richard sells timeshares in Florida." I interrupted, my voice sharp despite the tremor in my hands. "That's not the same thing as running a historic luxury hotel." Richard's face flushed an unflattering shade of crimson. "Now listen here, young lady. Your mother is trying to help you avoid making a catastrophic mistake. A property like this requires sophisticated management, financial expertise, and mature leadership. You're barely out of college." "I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in hospitality management from Cornell," I said, my voice level despite the anger boiling in my chest. "I have spent 3 years working at the hotel in every department. I know that property inside and out, and I have a management team that has been in place for over 2 decades. I don't need your help, and I certainly don't need anyone to manage my inheritance for me." My mother's expression shifted from persuasive to something harder and colder. Her eyes narrowed. "Emma, I'm your mother. I'm trying to protect you from your own naivety. You clearly don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." "Absolutely not." The words came out stronger than I expected, fueled by years of unspoken resentment. "I'm the owner now, and I will make my own decisions about how to run my property. You abandoned me when I was 3 years old." You showed up once or twice a year for awkward lunches until I was old enough to start refusing your invitations. You don't get to waltz in now and demand a piece of something you had nothing to do with building." The mask of maternal concern slipped completely, revealing the calculating coldness I remembered from every interaction with her. What I found next changed everything. "Fine. If that's how you want to play this, then let me make something very clear. You're living in my house right now." I blinked, utterly confused. "What are you talking about?" "This is Grandma's house. It's been in the Whitfield family for 4 generations. No, Emma, this house belongs to me." My mother's smile was razor sharp, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Your grandmother transferred the deed to me 15 years ago as part of a financial arrangement when I agreed not to pursue a larger divorce settlement from your father. I've been letting her live here, rent-free out of the goodness of my heart. But if you're going to be ungrateful and disrespectful, then I'll have to reconsider that generosity. Pack your bags and leave this house tonight." The world tilted beneath my feet. I turned to my father, who looked as shocked as I felt. "That's not possible," he stammered. "Mother never told me anything about transferring the deed to this house." "Check the property records yourself," my mother said smugly. "Richard, show them the documentation." Her husband produced a manila folder, its contents crisp and official. My father's trembling hands flipped through the pages, his face going pale as he read. "This appears to be legitimate," he said quietly, his voice hollow. "Dated 2009. Mother's signature is on the deed transfer." I felt like I was going to be sick. This Beacon Hill townhouse had been my second home my entire life. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday had taken place within these walls. My grandmother had lived here for over 50 years. The thought of her being evicted by my mother was unbearable. "Now," my mother said, her voice dripping with satisfaction, "let's discuss that hotel management arrangement again. I'm sure we can come to a reasonable." A low, resonant chuckle interrupted her from the doorway. My grandmother stood there, leaning on her silver-handled cane, her eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like amusement. "Oh, Valerie," she said, shaking her head slowly. "You always were transparent in your motivations. Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate this exact scenario?" My mother's triumphant expression faltered. "Dorothy, I wasn't aware you were listening. I'm old, dear, not deaf." My grandmother crossed the room with measured steps, the tap of her cane echoing softly, and lowered herself into her favorite armchair. "And I certainly haven't lost my faculties for strategic planning. Please have a seat. I believe it's time for another surprise." She gestured to the sofa, and after a moment's hesitation, my mother and Richard sat down stiffly. I remained standing, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. 16 years ago, my grandmother began, her voice calm as a summer lake, yet edged with steel. "You came to me with a proposition. Valerie, you had discovered some financial irregularities in the divorce settlement. Nothing illegal, but potentially embarrassing for Thomas if they became public. You agreed to keep quiet in exchange for the deed to this house, which you planned to hold over my head as insurance for future negotiations. Did you think I wasn't aware of your long-term strategy?" My mother's face had gone white. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." What my grandmother displayed here was a masterclass in long-term strategic thinking and preemptive counter-manipulation, often seen in high-stakes negotiations or even Machiavellian psychology. She understood Valerie's motivations and anticipated her moves years in advance, not out of malice, but out of a need to protect her family and legacy. By granting Valerie the perceived power of the deed, she actually set a trap, creating an illusion of leverage while subtly retaining ultimate control through a legally ironclad contingency plan. This isn't just about legal savvy. It's about a deep understanding of human nature and a willingness to play the long game. I transferred the deed to you because I wanted you to believe you had leverage. But I'm a businesswoman, Valerie. I've been making deals since before you were born. I always have contingencies." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and withdrew a slim envelope, which she handed to me. "Open it, Emma." Inside was a single sheet of paper, a document that appeared to be a lease agreement. I scanned the contents, and my eyes widened as comprehension dawned. "This is a 99-year ground lease," I said slowly, my voice barely a whisper. "Dated 2009, the same year as the deed transfer, correct?" My grandmother smiled. "When I transferred the deed to this house to your mother, I simultaneously executed a ground lease that grants me exclusive rights to occupy and use the property for 99 years at a rent of $1 per year. The lease is recorded with the Registry of Deeds, just like the property transfer. It's completely legal and completely binding." Richard grabbed the document from my hands, his face contorting as he read. "This can't be enforceable. You can't separate ownership from occupancy rights like this." I assure you, my attorneys were very thorough. My grandmother's tone was pleasant, almost conversational. "Ground leases are extremely common in commercial real estate. There's nothing unusual about this arrangement from a legal standpoint. Valerie owns the building, technically, but I control it entirely for the next 83 years, by which point I will certainly be dead, and the lease will transfer to Emma as part of my estate." My mother shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. "You manipulative old witch! You planned this all along. You let me think I had power over you for 15 years while you were laughing behind my back." But the final blow was yet to come. I wasn't laughing, Valerie. I was waiting. My grandmother's eyes hardened. "I wanted to see if you would ever become a decent human being. If you would ever show genuine interest in your daughter for reasons other than what you could gain from the connection. Tonight, you proved that you haven't changed at all. You heard about Emma's inheritance and immediately began scheming about how to control it. You threatened to evict an 83-year-old woman from her home of over 50 years to leverage your own child into giving you money. She rose from her chair, and despite her age and her cane, she seemed to tower over my mother, an aura of indomitable will radiating from her. I have one more surprise for you, and I suspect you'll like this one even less." My grandmother walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner and retrieved another envelope, this one thicker and bearing the letterhead of a prestigious Boston law firm. She handed it directly to my mother. "What is this?" My mother's hands were shaking as she tore it open. "That is a formal demand letter from my estate attorneys. You see, the deed transfer in 2009 was contingent on certain conditions being met. Specifically, that you would not interfere with my relationship with Emma or attempt to leverage the property for financial gain against any member of the Whitfield family. The document you signed 15 years ago includes a clause that automatically reverses the transfer if those conditions are violated." Richard was reading over my mother's shoulder, and his face had gone the color of old cheese. "She's right. There's a reversion clause. If Valerie attempts to use the property as leverage against any Whitfield family member, ownership automatically transfers back to your grandmother. Be threatening to evict me and Emma tonight," my grandmother said calmly. "You triggered the reversion clause. As of this moment, the property deed is void. My attorneys will file the necessary paperwork with the Registry of Deeds first thing Monday morning, and this house will be back in my name by the end of the week." My mother looked like she might faint. "You can't do this! I'll sue! I'll take this to court and you'll lose." My grandmother returned to her chair, looking utterly unperturbed. "I have 16 years of documented evidence of your attempts to manipulate this situation, including tonight's performance, which my security cameras recorded in full. Every attorney I've consulted has confirmed that the reversion clause is ironclad. You signed away your leverage the moment you tried to use it." The silence in the parlor was absolute, heavy with shattered dreams and unfulfilled greed. My father stood by the fireplace, his expression cycling through shock, relief, and something that looked suspiciously like grudging admiration for his mother's long game. My stepmother, Linda, had pressed herself against the wall, clearly wishing she could disappear entirely, and I stood in the middle of the room, still clutching the ground lease, trying to process everything that had just happened. My mother gathered the tattered remnants of her dignity and straightened her spine, though her eyes still held a frantic glint. "This isn't over, Dorothy. I have rights. Emma is my daughter, and I won't be cut out of her life like this. You cut yourself out of her life 21 years ago when you walked out on her and Thomas." My grandmother's voice was quiet but devastating. You've had 2 decades to be a mother to Emma. You chose not to. Now I suggest you leave before I decide to pursue legal action for attempted elder abuse and extortion. Richard, looking utterly defeated, grabbed my mother's arm and began pulling her toward the door. Valerie, we need to go now before this gets any worse. She shook him off, turning to face me one last time, her gaze desperate. Emma, sweetheart, you have to understand. Everything I've done has been for your benefit. I was trying to protect you from making mistakes with that hotel, from people who would take advantage of your inexperience. I'm your mother. I love you. I met her eyes and saw nothing but desperation, greed, and wounded pride. There was no maternal love there, no genuine concern for my well-being. There never had been. Goodbye, Valerie, I said, using her first name deliberately, drawing a line in the sand. Please don't contact me again. Something flickered across her face, perhaps the first genuine emotion I had seen from her all night, before she turned and swept out of the room. Richard followed, and moments later, the front door slammed with a finality that seemed to echo through the entire house. My grandmother exhaled slowly and suddenly looked every one of her 83 years. Well, that was more dramatic than I had anticipated. I crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her wrinkled hands in mine. Grandma, why didn't you tell me about the house, the lease, all of it? I've spent years worrying about what would happen if Mom ever tried to cause problems. And you had this entire safety net in place the whole time. She cupped my face in her palm, her touch gentle. Because I needed to know that you could stand on your own 2 feet, Emma. When your mother demanded to manage the hotel with you, you said no. You didn't look to me for help or approval. You made your own decision and stood by it. That was the final test, and you passed with flying colors. My father joined us, sitting on the arm of the settee. Mother, I had no idea you were capable of such Machiavellian scheming. I'm genuinely impressed. Where do you think you got your business instincts from? She smiled, but exhaustion was creeping into her features. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe this old woman has earned her rest. Emma, we'll discuss the hotel transition timeline tomorrow. For now, enjoy your birthday. You've certainly earned it. She rose and made her way toward the staircase, pausing at the doorway to look back at me. I'm proud of you, my darling. Your grandfather would have been proud of you too. After she left, I sank onto the sofa, suddenly aware of how much adrenaline had been pumping through my system. My hands were trembling, and I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired. Linda brought me a glass of water and sat down beside me. Are you all right, Emma? That was incredibly intense. I don't know what I am, I admitted. I came here tonight expecting a nice birthday dinner. Instead, I inherited a hotel, confronted my estranged mother, and watched my grandmother execute a legal chess move that was 16 years in the making. My father laughed, though there was a tension to it. Welcome to the Whitfield family, sweetheart. We don't do anything simply. But what came next was an unexpected challenge. The weeks following my birthday were a whirlwind of activity, though the immediate aftermath of that confrontation brought its own challenges that I hadn't anticipated. The morning after the dinner, I woke to find 17 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize and a flood of text messages from my mother, alternating between desperate pleas and venomous accusations. She had apparently spent the entire night strategizing with Richard, and their approach shifted every few hours. First came the apologetic messages, promising she had overreacted and simply wanted what was best for me. When I didn't respond, the tone changed to threats about hiring investigators to find dirt on my grandmother's business dealings. By dawn, she had cycled back to tearful voicemails, begging me to reconsider. I blocked both their numbers and tried to focus on the monumental task ahead of me. My grandmother insisted on accompanying me to the hotel that first Monday, wanting to formally introduce me to the staff as the new owner. Walking through the lobby of the Whitfield Grand that morning felt different than all the summers I had spent there. The bellhops I had worked alongside now straightened their posture when they saw me. The front desk manager, Carolyn, who had taught me the reservation system 3 years earlier, greeted me with a mixture of warmth and nervous formality. None of that, my grandmother said firmly when Carolyn called me Miss Whitfield for the 3rd time. She's still Emma. The title doesn't change the person. Patricia Chen met us in the administrative wing. Her office was a testament to 2 decades of meticulous organization, color-coded files, synchronized calendars, and a whiteboard covered in occupancy projections, maintenance schedules, and staff rotations. "I've prepared a transition binder," Patricia said, handing me a thick leather portfolio. "It covers everything from vendor contracts to emergency protocols. But honestly, Emma, you already know most of this. You've been preparing for this role, whether you realized it or not." The first few weeks tested that preparation relentlessly. A pipe burst in the kitchen during a sold-out weekend, requiring emergency repairs that cost nearly 40,000. One of our longest tenured concierges announced his retirement, taking decades of institutional knowledge with him. An influential travel blogger wrote a scathing review after a miscommunication about her room assignment, and I spent hours crafting a response that acknowledged the error without being defensive or obsequious. Through it all, my grandmother watched from a careful distance, offering advice only when I asked for it directly. She had spent 6 decades building this legacy, and I knew it couldn't be easy for her to step back and watch someone else make decisions, even someone she trusted. "You're doing beautifully," she told me one evening when I stopped by the townhouse for dinner. "Better than I did at your age. And I had your grandfather to lean on. You're navigating this alone." "I'm not alone," I reminded her. "I have you. I have Dad. I have Patricia and the entire staff." She smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that I didn't fully understand until much later. "You have all of us for now, my darling. But eventually, you'll need to trust yourself completely. That's the hardest part of leadership, learning that the final decision rests on your shoulders alone." And then a visitor arrived, carrying a chilling warning that would force me to confront my past in a way I never expected. True to her word, my grandmother's attorneys filed the reversion paperwork, and the townhouse deed was back in her name within 10 days. My mother attempted to contest it, hiring her own attorneys, but they quickly advised her to drop the case after reviewing the original documents. The reversion clause was exactly as ironclad as my grandmother had promised. Meanwhile, I threw myself into the hotel transition. Patricia Chen, the general manager, became an invaluable mentor as I learned the aspects of the business that my previous internships had only touched on: financial projections, vendor negotiations, staffing decisions, regulatory compliance. The learning curve was steep, but I attacked it with determination. 3 months after my birthday, I was sitting in what had become my office at the Whitfield Grand when my assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Whitfield, there's a woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. Her name is Margaret Thornton." I frowned, not recognizing the name immediately. "Thornton. She says she's your stepfather's first wife." My curiosity got the better of me. "Send her in." Margaret Thornton was a small woman in her late 50s with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had endured significant hardship. She entered my office hesitantly, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Thank you for seeing me, Miss Whitfield. I know this is unusual. Please sit down." I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Thornton?" "I understand your mother is married to my ex-husband, Richard," she said, her hands still tight on her purse. "I've been following the news about your inheritance and the legal dispute, and I felt I needed to warn you about something." Over the next hour, Margaret Thornton told me a story that made my blood run cold. Richard Thornton, it turned out, had a pattern of marrying wealthy women and slowly draining their assets through a combination of manipulation, forged documents, and strategic investments that somehow always benefited accounts in his name alone. Margaret had been his first victim, losing her family's modest savings before she managed to divorce him. She had spent years trying to warn other women about him, but his charm and her lack of concrete proof had made it difficult. "I've been tracking his marriages," she said, pulling a folder from her purse. "Your mother is his fourth wife. The previous 3 all ended up significantly poorer than when they started, and 2 of them faced serious legal problems after the divorces. I think he's targeting your family now that he knows about the hotel and the properties. I stared at the documents she had spread across my desk: bank records, court filings, testimony from previous wives. A chilling pattern emerged, clear and damning. This wasn't just a man. This was a professional financial predator, a type of con artist who exploits personal relationships for monetary gain. Such individuals often display a high degree of charm and superficial charisma, using it to gain trust and isolate their victims. Their methods are rarely brute force theft, but rather subtle erosion of assets, making it incredibly difficult for victims to recognize they're being defrauded until it's too late. Richard's systematic approach, targeting increasingly affluent women and creating complex financial structures, indicated a sophisticated and dangerous operator. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice strained. "You don't know me. You have no stake in what happens to my mother." Margaret's expression softened. "Because I have a daughter about your age, and I know what it's like to watch someone you love be manipulated by a predator. Your mother may have made choices that hurt you, but she doesn't deserve what Richard will do to her. And more importantly, you don't deserve to have him in your life, circling around your inheritance like a vulture." I took the folder and promised to review everything carefully. After Margaret left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, staring at the evidence of Richard Thornton's decades of financial predation. The documents painted a portrait of a sophisticated operator who knew exactly how to identify vulnerable targets. His first marriage to Margaret had been a learning experience, a chance to refine his techniques before moving on to wealthier prey. Each subsequent wife had been more affluent than the last, and each had ended up financially devastated by the time Richard moved on to his next victim. What struck me most was the methodology. Richard didn't simply steal money outright. That would have been too obvious, too easily prosecuted. Instead, he positioned himself as a helpful partner who wanted to relieve the burden of financial management from his busy wives. He would suggest consolidating accounts for efficiency, recommend investments through contacts who were actually accomplices, and slowly redirect funds into structures so complex that even forensic accountants had difficulty tracing them. My mother, for all her faults, had never been financially naive. She had managed the divorce settlement from my father shrewdly, investing conservatively and living well within her means. The fact that Richard had managed to gain her trust enough to access her finances spoke to his skill as a manipulator. I called my father that evening and told him everything Margaret had revealed. "Good God," he breathed when I finished. "Valerie may be difficult, but she doesn't deserve to be victimized like this. What are you planning to do?" What was I going to do? That was the question. "I don't know yet." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. Part of me thinks it's not my problem. She made her choice when she married him, and she certainly didn't show me any consideration when she tried to take the house from Grandma. My father was quiet for a long moment. "You're right that you don't owe her anything, Emma, but I've found that the decisions I'm most proud of in my life are the ones I made based on who I wanted to be, not on what other people deserved. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." I spent the next several days researching, verifying Margaret's claims through independent sources, and consulting with an attorney who specialized in financial fraud. Everything checked out. Richard Thornton was exactly what his first wife had described: a professional predator in a tailored suit. The vindictive part of me, the part that remembered every missed birthday, every broken promise, every time my mother had chosen her own interests over mine, wanted to do nothing. Let Richard drain her dry. Let her experience the consequences of her choices. But my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Being wealthy doesn't give you the right to be cruel, Emma. It gives you the responsibility to be wise." I made a decision. 2 weeks later, I arranged a meeting with my mother at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in Back Bay, where we were unlikely to be recognized. She arrived looking thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite conceal. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," I said as she sat down. "I know things ended badly at my birthday dinner." She waved her hand dismissively, but the gesture lacked her usual imperious confidence. "What do you want, Emma?" "If this is about the house, Your grandmother's lawyers have made it very clear that I have no legal recourse. It's not about the house. I slid the folder across the table. It's about your husband. I watched her face as she read through the documents. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hands began to shake. By the time she reached the financial record showing how Richard had already begun siphoning funds from her personal accounts, tears were streaming down her face. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice raw. I thought he loved me. He said he wanted to help manage our finances, that he had experience with investments. I trusted him. Something shifted in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. My mother was a narcissist and a manipulator, but she was also human, capable of being deceived by someone more skilled at the game than she was. I've arranged for you to meet with a forensic accountant and a divorce attorney, I said quietly. Both are the best in Boston, and I've covered their retainers. The accountant can trace where your money has gone, and the attorney can help you protect what's left while you extricate yourself from the marriage. The quiet resolution that followed was nothing short of miraculous. She looked up at me, her mascara smearing her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Why? After everything I've done to you, why would you help me? Because someone helped me when I needed it most. I thought of my grandmother, of my father, of the community of support that had surrounded me my entire life despite my mother's absence. And because I don't want to become the kind of person who watches someone drown out of spite, even if they might deserve it, my mother reached across the table and gripped my hand. Emma, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, and I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I am truly sorry for being such a terrible mother. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. I didn't say I forgave her because I wasn't sure I did. Instead, I simply said, take the help, fix your situation, and maybe if you want, we can try to have coffee sometime. Start small. She nodded, wiping her eyes with her napkin. I'd like that. I'd really like that. We sat in silence for several minutes, neither of us quite sure how to proceed now that the confrontation had given way to something raw and more uncertain. Finally, my mother asked about the hotel, and I found myself describing the challenges of the past few months, the burst pipe, the staffing changes, the constant pressure of living up to my grandmother's legacy. Your grandmother was always formidable, my mother said quietly. When I first married your father, I was terrified of her. She had this way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see every thought in your head, every weakness you were trying to hide. She's direct. I agreed. But she's also the most generous person I've ever known. She gave me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. My mother's expression flickered with something that might have been regret. I know, and I know that you stepped in to fill the role I should have played. I told myself for years that you were better off without me, that your father and his family could provide stability that I wasn't capable of offering. But the truth is, I was selfish. I wanted freedom more than I wanted responsibility, and you paid the price for that choice. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. Not an excuse, not a justification, just a plain acknowledgement of the truth. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. It doesn't fix anything, but it helps to hear it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box, sliding it across the table toward me. This was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me on my 21st birthday, and I should have given it to you months ago. I kept telling myself I'd find the right moment, but there never seemed to be one. Inside the box was a delicate gold bracelet set with tiny sapphires, clearly antique and obviously valuable. I recognized it from old photographs I had seen of my maternal grandmother, a woman who had died before I was born. I can't accept this, I started, but my mother shook her head. Please, it's the one thing I can give you that has nothing to do with money or manipulation. It's just family history passed down from mother to daughter. Let me do this one thing right. I clasped the bracelet around my wrist, feeling the weight of it settle against my skin. It was beautiful, and wearing it felt like connecting to a part of my heritage that my mother's absence had denied me. The divorce proceedings were ugly, but ultimately successful. The forensic accountant uncovered nearly 400 Zallows that Richard had already transferred to offshore accounts, and the divorce attorney managed to freeze those assets before he could disappear with them. Richard Thornton faced criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement, and Margaret's documentation proved crucial in establishing the pattern of behavior that convinced the prosecutor to take the case seriously. My mother emerged from the marriage diminished but not destroyed. She sold her condo, moved to a smaller apartment, and began seeing a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from relationships with narcissists and con artists. Our coffee meetings became monthly occurrences, then weekly. And while I wouldn't say we developed a close relationship, we developed an honest one. 2 years after that pivotal birthday dinner, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the Whitfield Grand, watching the sunset paint the harbor in shades of gold and crimson. The hotel had just received its 3rd consecutive 5-star rating from a major travel publication, and occupancy rates were at an all-time high. My grandmother had passed away peacefully 6 months earlier, leaving me the Beacon Hill townhouse, a substantial investment portfolio, and a letter that I kept in my desk drawer and read whenever I needed guidance. Being wealthy is not about the money, she had written. It's about the power to shape the world around you. Use that power wisely. Use it kindly, and never, ever let anyone make you feel small because of your age or your gender or their own petty jealousies. You earned your place at this table, Emma. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. My father joined me on the terrace, handing me a glass of champagne. Patricia tells me the renovations on the East Wing are coming in under budget. She also said to tell you that she's never seen anyone pick up hospitality management as quickly as you have. I smiled, clinking my glass against his. I had excellent teachers. Below us, the city sparkled as lights began flickering on across the waterfront. The hotel that my grandmother and grandfather had built from nothing stood strong and prosperous, a testament to their vision and hard work. And now it was mine to protect and nurture for the next generation. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Good luck with the investor meeting tomorrow. You'll be brilliant. Call me after. I typed back a quick response, then tucked the phone away and turned my attention back to the view. My 21st birthday had given me a hotel, revealed family secrets I never knew existed, and set me on a path I was still learning to navigate. There were days when the weight of responsibility felt crushing, when imposter syndrome whispered that I was too young and too inexperienced to be running a multi-million-dollar property. But there were also days like this one, when the sunset was beautiful, and my family was mostly intact, and the future stretched out before me like an endless horizon of possibility. My grandmother had believed in me, my father believed in me, and slowly I was learning to believe in myself. The champagne was excellent, the company was good, and tomorrow was full of promise. For now, that was enough. This story is more than just a tale of inheritance and family drama. It's a powerful illustration of complex psychological and social dynamics at play. We saw blatant attempts at gaslighting by Emma's mother, a manipulative tactic designed to undermine Emma's confidence and control her decisions by questioning her competence and experience. Understanding gaslighting can empower us to recognize and resist such insidious psychological abuse in our own lives. Furthermore, the grandmother's strategic long-term planning, a masterclass in Machiavellian intelligence, highlights how foresight and a deep understanding of human motivations can be used not for evil, but for protection and legacy. Finally, Richard Thornton exemplifies a narcissistic financial predator, a type of individual who expertly uses charm and manufactured trust to exploit others' vulnerabilities for personal gain. Recognizing the signs of such predatory behavior, the quick development of intimacy, the attempts to control finances, the isolation from supportive networks, can be crucial for safeguarding ourselves and those we care about. This story teaches us that true power lies not just in wealth, but in wisdom, integrity, and the courage to make difficult choices that align with our values, even when it means extending a hand to those who may not deserve it, but desperately need it. So, this story explores deep questions about forgiveness, responsibility, and the messy ties of family. When faced with someone who has hurt you deeply, but is now in genuine distress, do you believe there's a moral obligation to help? Or is it okay to let them face the consequences of their own choices?